Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Braun, to your point, this idea of four-year degrees, it's an arbitrary number, 120 credits. We've made this decision that we've stuck with for 100 years that you need to go to college for this number of hours for this many years in order to get that degree. And employers tell us that they want skills, right? They want people who are ready to work, and that comes in a variety of forms and manners. And so I think you're on the right track, and I think that this conversation about holding colleges to a standard of performance is all about stimulating the kind of innovation that we so badly, desperately need in higher education. Because there seems to me to be a trade that if you have a nationwide standard where we're expecting everybody to deliver student outcomes where folks can get a job and be able to pay back their loans, then maybe we can take the pressure off of schools in the ways that we micromanage them about how they deliver those degrees. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to recognize what we haven't been testing as a means to provide some more innovation. The honest assessment of the current accountability system is that we're really not holding schools accountable for performance. I love our accreditors, but less than 1% of schools lose their accreditation on an annual basis, despite the fact that you have $400 million going out to schools that have loan default cohort rates of 30 to 40%. We similarly only sanction less than 1% of schools under Title IV. And so there's a tiny percentage of schools that are ultimately feeling real heat on performance, and a vast overregulation of schools on lots of other factors. And we frankly haven't even talked about one of the most important regulators here, and that's U.S. News and World Report. I spend way more time talking to my college presidents about how they're going to move up the rankings on U.S. News and World Report than I spend talking to them about how they're going to pass their next accreditors test. So, we got a lot of stuff that we ask schools to do, and we could simplify our accountability system, focus on performance for everybody, and I think that would end up stimulating a lot of innovation. And I would argue that we should still keep some additional heat on the for-profits, but that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive from a higher standard for everybody else. Dr. Tamberg, let me put that question to you, I guess, to see what you think about this idea that if you had a stronger sense that schools really had to meet a performance standard that was much more meaningful than what we have today, and that was applied across the board, do you think that would be a means to try to get at what Senator Braun is talking about? It would give us a little bit more confidence that innovation can be protected and channeled in the right way?
You're hitting at just such an important issue, and there's certainly a lot of debate out there in regards to what you're talking about. I certainly agree that there are better metrics. The repayment rate absolutely would perform in accomplishing the goals that you outlined much better than the default rate. My concern is this. The experience at the state level with performance funding, right, is that if there isn't explicit attention to underrepresented students of color and low-income students, an accountability program will most likely hurt them.
Correct.
Okay? And so in anything that the federal government does, specific and explicit accounting for those students must be included. And you can go beyond higher education, the history of our country. If we're not explicit about underrepresented, under-resourced individuals, they get hurt.
I totally agree. You've got to have some filter here to make sure that you don't get adverse consequences. I wanted to fit in one last question for you, Dr. Whelan, and that's just to push back a little bit on this idea that we should leave accountability to a conversation between accreditors and the institutions themselves. You testified that currently you require institutions to identify at least one student completion indicator. I would have loved as a student if I got to determine how I was graded, because I'd just come up with the ways in which I could get the highest grade. why should we leave it up to schools to determine how completion or performance is assessed? Why shouldn't we have one metric that is national in scope so that students can compare apples to apples and understand that schools themselves may ultimately not be the best judges of their own performance?
I think the identification.
Why don't you take the time you need to answer that question? That's
Thank you.
an important question.
The metric of student achievement is the metric. The level of that performance is what I'm concerned about, because all institutions are not the same. All student bodies are not the same. If I put in a 40% graduation rate right now as the baseline for all of my institutions, half of my institutions would not be accredited, because they'd lose membership and we wouldn't be educating anybody in those career and technical programs you talked about, because many of those students take forever to graduate, and it's just not accounted for when you look at that. These programs that are 1 year, 2 year programs often will take 2, 3, and 4 years because students are going part-time. So I'm concerned that if you put in that bright line of a 40%, you're going to hurt the very institutions that you're trying to keep in business to educate students to go into the workforce.
It's an important distinction you're making.